Welcome, everybody. It's the closing panel of Multiple Universes. It's been such an exciting series from all the speakers and attendees. Thank you all for your contributions. I'm not sure who that is, but someone will find them and mute them, right? Okay. We will encourage you to mute your microphones during the presentation and unmute them during our Q&A if you're called on. I'm Jenna Axelrod, one of the associate directors of the Perry Center. You're used to James doing this, but James will be leading the panel discussion today. So I will be introducing you to James. Before I do that, I just want to remind everybody, this session is being recorded for archival reasons and for you all. The recordings will be available about 3 days after the session. And if you need any help during the course of this session, feel free to chat to me and I will do my best. And I'm really excited for today's discussion, but I will leave the introductions to James. James Pete Barbieri will be our facilitator today. He is the Associate Programming Director of the Perry Center and host of most of these events, as you know. And James has been taking part of Perry Center events since the age of 11 and was the teaching assistant of his granddad, David Pete. Please welcome James. Take it away.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you everyone for joining us today at this closing discussion. Today, we'll reflect on some of the topics that have emerged in the last few weeks. We're going to have the first section will be a discussion amongst the panel, and then we will move on to open up to everyone. So feel free to ask your question. So our panel is very exciting. Today we have Bernard Carr, professor at Queen Mary University and president of the Scientific Medical Network. We have Ruth Kastner, author and PhD in history and philosophy of science from the University of Maryland. We have Mindahi Crescencio Bastida Muñoz, director of the Original Nations program at the Fountain and a member of the Mother Earth delegation. We have Paul Tappenden, author and teacher of philosophy of science to physics students in Grenoble in France, and Jean-Francois, author and clinical psychologist in Quebec. So welcome everyone. I'd just like to start with a quick fire question just to warm up, which we've prepared. And the question is, why, as scientists and philosophers, should we worry about multiple universes if we only belong to one? As a quantum physicist who is close to the Perry Center once said to us, I don't want to hear about the multiverse. I am only concerned about studying this one. So with that, I'll leave it to you. Who would like to start answering that question?
Well, I guess I could say a little bit. Of course, in my approach, I see it not so much as multiple universes like the one we see, but more in terms of multiple possibilities that I think the structure of quantum theory is suggesting. So, if you saw my talk, I mentioned that I discussed how I think that the quantum formalism, if you take it in a realistic sense, in other words, if you think that the theory is describing something in the world, what it's describing is not a bunch of 3+1 dimensional space-time objects or events. So it's kind of obligatory in a sense for anyone who wants to be realist about quantum theory to take seriously this larger structure, which I interpret as possibilities. So there's myriad possibilities. And if you don't do that, I've argued in my talk, you're just kind of falling back on kind of a typical traditional metaphysical paradigm that really needs to be examined. It's in terms of, is it really obligatory, or is it just some baggage that we need to kind of question? So that's what I would put out there.
Great, thank you, Ruth. Bernard?
Okay. Well, it seems to me that the whole history of humanity has been one of expanding our knowledge to ever larger scales, so we started off in little villages, and then we learnt about the country, and then we went across the oceans and learnt about the other continents. And at every stage, people might say, well, what's the point? We've got enough problems at home. And now we think about expanding our awareness beyond the planet Earth to the, other exoplanets and even beyond the galaxy. And at every stage, people might say, what's the point? We've got enough problems here on Earth to deal with. What's the point of going into space? But the fact of the matter is that we're driven as a process of evolution, almost certainly mental evolution, to understand more and more about the universe, and the boundaries just seem to expand. Now, one cannot promise that there's going to be any practical benefits from that. One cannot promise that there's going to be much practical benefits from ordinary cosmology in this universe, or from developments in particle physics. Mind you, I bet there will turn out to be practical benefits. I mean, when we know what the dark energy is, that may well have practical benefits. When we know about many worlds and understanding quantum theory, that may be helpful in understanding quantum computers and things like that. But regardless of what the practical benefits actually are, it just seems to me knowledge is of huge importance for its own sake. And I think it was Shantina who said at some point during the discussion yesterday that in some sense, the universe seems to be wanting to become aware of itself. There's an evolution of consciousness whereby the universe is getting to know itself. And I know that sounds mystical, but I feel we are part of that. And when we speculate about anything, about fundamental physics, whether it's M theory or the multiverse, it's all part of the universe getting to know itself. And what's fascinating is that we as individuals are all involved in that process. And for example, I always like to think, there's 7 billion people in the planet, and we're all so insignificant, in that we're only 1 in 7 billion people. But anybody doing a PhD, even if they've not become professors, anyone doing a PhD has learned something about the universe. They know something about the universe that nobody else knows on the planet. And possibly nobody else knows about in the universe. And to me, that's an amazing feeling that we are individually part of the process of the universe coming to know itself. And to me, that is an end in itself, and somehow almost more important than the practical benefits of whether it's going to solve global warming or something like that. So that's my rather, mystical answer.
Great. Thank you, Bernard, for your answer.
To continue. Paul?
Sorry, Jean-Francois, go ahead.
It's okay. I love your connection with Carl Sagan, Bernard. It's Carl Sagan said that we are a way for the universe to know itself. Carl Sagan said that.
Thank you. I didn't even know that, but that's wonderful that he said that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I feel very like that. So, and I want to thank you very much, Bernard, for your representation of the Ouroboros universe. It gave me insight about the collective individuation. I can see individuation as an expansion of our consciousness through different scales. So thank you very much. I would like to answer to the question, James, by asking for me, what is the big challenge of our time? It's the challenge of integration of knowledge, integration of people, integration of ideas. And so for me, I am worried about the universe, but I'm so curious, not only worried, but curious too, to how we will integrate all different kind of opposite in our world. And so different kind of opposite. And I have seen Dune yesterday, the movie by Denis Villeneuve. That was my secret movie of my presentation. And in Dune, Frank Herbert, who created the novel, he said at one time, I see it in an interview, and I think it's very relevant for our discussion here. He gave a good definition of what is ecology. Ecology is the science that studied consequences. ecology is the science that studies consequences, the consequence. So I think it's very important to ask this question. When we have power, we have the power of knowledge, we have the power of spice. So when we have power to explore ideas, power to explore universe, how we deal with this power. And so I will finish my introduction with what the humanity has crossed in the recent year. The COVID-19 exposed us to big fragmentation from everywhere. And I propose this idea that maybe COVID-19 is like the gum jabbar of our humanity. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Francois, for coming in. Paul, would you like to try and answer the
Yeah, okay. Look, for the sake of efficiency, I've actually prepared something to read out because I thought it would be more, well, the way to get it all in quickly. So I read it out. Bernard has talked about why the existence or not of cosmological universes is important to how we think about the human condition. The existence of the dendritic multiverse, which I talked about, is important in a different way. One notorious consequence is certain survival of what's known as quantum Russian roulette. A quantum six-gun has a probability of 1/6 of blowing your brains out, but you will always have future temporal counterparts, however many times you pull the trigger. The cosmologist Max Tegmark wrote about that in 1998 in the New Scientist article entitled Dying to Know. After having pulled the trigger 100 times, you could be pretty sure you were living in a dendritic multiverse. But that's not to be taken lightly. In the process, you'd leave friends and family in many branches heartbroken that you'd done such a silly thing and blown your brains out. I forgot. And then there's a bit more. This leads to a rather disturbing conclusion, which the philosopher David Lewis talked about during his Jack Smart lecture at the Australian National University in 2001. This is what he said. What you should predominantly expect if the no collapse hypothesis is true, which is the dendritic view, is cumulative deterioration that stops just short of death. Everett's idea is elegant, but heaven forfend it should be true. Sad to say, a reason to wish it false is no reason to believe it false. So according to Lewis, if we accept dendritic quantum mechanics, we may have to accept that we do not come to an end at death, we go into a sort of eternal limbo of decrepitude. So that could be a bit worrying, and you might hope it's not true.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul. And finally, Mindahi, what is your position on this?
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to share with you. And it's very complex and at the same time very simple to think about this, because we have this interrelationship with the cosmos ourselves, but there is a material and immaterial relationship. So just think about when you close your eyes, you have already those thoughts, and many thoughts are just repetitive. Many thoughts are evil thoughts, and very few are good thinking. And you know, this is about to bring the consciousness about how to think beautifully. And when we think about multiple universes, it's about that connection that most of the time is immaterial in our cosmology. Because when you carry out some ceremonies, some rituals, you get connected to those entities and those unseen, let's say, beings, and those beings are unfolding all the time. So this universe is unfolding, but we have experienced that there are other dimensions, might be in your words, other universes, but ourselves, myself, I have experienced in being in other places that how the mind, how our thoughts are able to connect with that mystery, with that unknown, and at the same time, you grasp something. And you know, the knowledge that we have is not enough, because as human beings, it's not enough to understand or to comprehend what is this big mystery. So we have a saying, instead of understanding what is the big mystery, we live in mystery. So that's very powerful, because we see intelligence everywhere. There's intelligence everywhere. And there are higher intelligences, like this planet. This planet is a very beautiful, intelligent being. We don't understand at all, because we think we understand, we want to chop with science all what we relate to. And it's why we are trying to understand through those models, that this positivist way of thinking is not allowing us to really interact. Ourselves as human beings, we have at least three units in the same unit, let's say. The body, the mind, the thoughts, let's say, related to science or to knowledge, traditional knowledge, whatever you name it, and energy. So we think, and I think, that energy is the most powerful thing that all beings have. And it's through that we can feel that notion of other universes. It's through that energy that we can feel that connection with other dimensions. And it's not just human beings who can access to this. It's the plants, the animals, and the minerals. So yes, we need to think from the I to the we. As the we is not just human beings, but this planet, other celestial bodies, other universes. So who are we here to really to say that it's not possible? It is possible. And it is impossible every time that we are connected. Not just through mind, but through that energy. So that's the beautiful opportunity that we have as human beings. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mindahi, for your answer, and very beautifully put. Just
I could just
Ruth, go ahead.
With and I'm sorry, I'm not recalling the gentleman's name who just spoke.
Mindahi.
I'm sorry?
Mindahi.
Mindahi. Oh, I would just really like to connect with what you said. And in my talk, I presented the idea that quantum theory really is kind of acting like as a doorway that sort of ironically was arrived at through traditional physical science, and yet that the puzzles and the paradoxes that it presents to us are really puzzles for the left brain, so to speak, the kind of traditional Western positivistic mindset that cannot deal with the ontological picture that is presented by quantum theory. And so unfortunately, a lot of the community just rejects that and says, well, I'm going to cook up something that lets me keep my locality and my, all of my prejudices that I want to have. But to me, it's a great irony that quantum theory, which was arrived at, in a way, it was arrived at because Heisenberg jettisoned all these models he was trying to make and went into kind of a Zen-like beginner's mind. And so what if I just stop imposing my prejudices and listen to the data, and then, oh, look, this is what it's giving me. That's so weird, but I'll just work with it. And in trusting nature's signals without trying to impose on them, that is what gave us quantum theory. And I think that, you know, it's in my mind, it makes sense that the literally higher dimensional mathematical space that is demanded by quantum theory can nicely correspond to this domain, this larger domain of possibility and this sort of immaterial reality. We would view it as immaterial in our usual way, simply because it's not empirical, it's not empirically accessible. So that, to me, that's the excitement of this kind of approach to interpreting quantum theory, to letting it be non-local, letting reality be strange, letting it be not the way we want, because it's not the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. It's the unseen portion that's very real and very important. So I think it's nice to tie all the, you know, call it mystical if you want, but, you know, that's not a pejorative. It's just a school of thought, a body of knowledge that is arrived at through experiential, intuitional means. And it makes perfect sense to me that you could arrive at the same insights from sort of the left brain scientific approach and the right brain mystical approach, and say, oh yeah, this is just two sides of a coin. It's the same reality. We're just approaching it from different kinds of you know, ways of learning. But not to disparage either way, but just recognize that maybe we need both of them. So I'm excited by those comments, and I see a lot of common ground there.
Thank you, Ruth, for coming in. So now we will go to more specific questions for each of you. We'll try and keep it to about 5 minutes for an answer. Let's start with Paul. So the question for you is, what is the relationship between your presentation on dendritic quantum mechanics and the Bohmian theory?
Right, okay, so again, in order to keep within the time limit, what I've done is written something which I'll read out so that I don't sort of miss anything by trying to do it ad lib. The philosophy of quantum theory is not moving towards a consensus. On the contrary, ideas seem to be ever more diverse. So bear in mind that what I was talking about was just one stall in a large market, as was Ruth. I argued that it's intelligible that Alice's world could be an infinite set of stochastic worlds. In that case, she would split into Alice up and Alice down on branches whose subset measures would be the probabilities for those futures. But Everett's idea was to replace the concept of a stochastic process by that of a dendritic process, in which case the worlds which are the set theoretic elements of Alice's world must be deterministic, not stochastic. This is where there's a connection with theory. If the worlds in a set of parallel worlds are deterministic and all exactly alike, then there's no reason for the set to partition into branches. There must be hidden differences between the worlds. The hidden variables of Bohmian theory are just what's required. Basil suggested that he has a way of understanding Bohmian theory without hidden variables, so I'll stick to the label pilot wave theory, where the idea is that hidden particles are guided along trajectories by waves. This connects with a problem from any world theory, which Tim talked about at the beginning of his response to my question last week. It's the ontological problem, the problem of what there is. Because ever since Everett, many world theorists, including myself until recently, have taken it to be what he called a pure wave theory, which means that an electron going through a two-slit apparatus has indefinite position and momentum at any given moment. It doesn't follow a trajectory through one or the other slits. How can an electron, which physicists agree has a radius of less than 1,000th that of a proton, not have a position at a time? The ridiculousness of that idea is what Schrödinger was getting at with his cat. But the idea isn't so ridiculous in Alice's world if it's an infinite set of parallel pilot wave worlds in which the hidden trajectories differ. If Alice sends an electron through a two-slit apparatus, her electron is an infinite set of electrons, each in a pilot wave world. In some of those worlds, the electron goes through the left slit, and in the others, it goes through the right slit. In Alice's world, a Schrödinger cat is a set which has live and dead cats as elements. But why bother with all this? Why not simply accept that we inhabit a single pilot wave world? A reason to accept the multiplicity is that it's possible to understand dendritic quantum mechanics in a way which doesn't entail the non-locality which Ruth and Tim talked about, and which physicists would generally like to do without if they could. So of course, I'm diametrically opposed to what Ruth is saying. That's to say, in Alice's world, there's no non-locality. There's no instantaneous action at a distance. But in the worlds which are the set theoretical elements of Alice's world, there is no non-locality. That may seem to undermine Bohmian philosophy because the concept of non-locality is central to it. However, if there's no non-locality in our world, that doesn't mean that we're not connected with it quantum mechanically. There's still entanglement. The difference is that we're only entangled with what's in our past, what physicists call the contents of our past light cone. You're entangled with the Andromeda galaxy, which you can see as a tiny smudge on a clear dark night. But you're not entangled with it as it is now, in inverted commas. You're not entangled with it on what physicists call your simultaneity hyperplane. Out there, in what physicists call your absolute elsewhere, it's a Schrödinger galaxy because it's a set of galaxies which have evolved in myriad different ways during the 2 million years which have passed since the light which you see was emitted. So you see again, in contrast to what Ruth is saying, this is actualist, and there's no distinction between possibility and actuality. Everything is actual, which means that all the ways the Andromeda galaxy could develop in the last 2 million years, it has done so. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. Well, next then we will go to Bernard. The question for you is, how strongly linked are your speculations about the multiverse, which arrive from the conventional physics, and the higher dimensional models of the mind, which relate to more controversial fields like the psychical research?
Well, James, that's a very interesting question. And I suppose I'm rather schizophrenic, because when I'm talking about the multiverse to physicists and cosmologists, I'm really always talking in the terms that I presented in my first Parry lecture. In other words, I neglect anything to do with consciousness and mind. I'm just talking about how different types of multiverse arise from ordinary physics. And that might be from inflationary theory in cosmology, or it might be from M theory, where you get the string landscape, or of course it might be from the many worlds that Paul has talked about. But that's one of my passions, because I'm a cosmologist. But my other passion is to understand how mind and consciousness fits into the universe. But that's not my professional capacity. That's what I do in my spare time. But to be honest, now I'm retired, I spend more time thinking about that than I do about cosmology. And as you will have gathered from the talk I gave yesterday, my own approach to extending physics to accommodate mind and indeed spirituality is to invoke higher dimensions. And so the question was, how do we link these ideas? Because the idea of higher dimensions, I talked about a model where we think of our physical world as a brain, B-R-A-N-E, in a five-dimensional universe. And you might recall that one of my multiverse scenarios did involve a brain. You know, there was the brain multiverse where you say there are lots of brains all separated in the fifth dimension. So in some sense, when I talk about the multiverse and its possible relationship to mind, I'm talking about, I am favoring a particular version of the multiverse. That's to say, the version of the multiverse which involves brains in different dimensions. And so in the context of my second talk, that is the version of the multiverse which I actually personally prefer. But I have to say, I don't express that when talking to physicists, because most physicists do not share my interest in expanding physics to mind, you know, to mind and spirit. I mean, I think the people here, especially Ruth, are an exception to that, because I know she is interested in that. And indeed, Ruth, I was so delighted to learn that your interpretation of quantum mechanics, you know, with the higher dimensions, has a strong overlap with my model. And I don't think you were at my talk yesterday, but I really look forward to interacting with you further about this and exchanging our ideas and papers and things, because I'm really excited by how close our approaches are.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so I
Yeah.
mean, I said I'm schizophrenic because I would answer differently if I was talking to a physics audience and if I'm talking to the Parry audience. I actually, my own personal, if you ask me what is my favorite multiverse scenario, I would have to say, if I'm honest, my favorite multiverse is the multiverse that involves the higher dimensions. And the reason for that is very simple, that actually, in trying to extend your model of physics to higher dimensions, to talk about not only normal mental experience, but also transpersonal mental experience, or even mystical experience, you're actually talking about different levels of reality. You're saying you're going beyond the normal materialistic view of reality, you know, which in some sense was killed a long time ago, even by ordinary physics. So you're talking about a multiverse of extra dimensions which correspond to different levels of reality and different levels of experience, which most physicists don't even believe in. You know, they think it's all illusory. So that's my honest answer. The multiverse that I'm really most interested in is the multiverse with higher dimensions. And what's fascinating is I think those higher dimensions which are required in order to accommodate mind are also the higher dimensions that Ruth wants to accommodate quantum theory. I'm not sure whether Paul wants them. We can talk about that later. But the key link in both of these is consciousness, because, you know, when I did talk about, I avoided talking about mind in my first lecture, but I did talk about the fine tuning, and I raised the question that the fine tuning might be linked to consciousness. And to me, that's the common link between my two talks, the role of consciousness, because consciousness, although it doesn't appear in physics per se, it does seem to arise through the fine-tuning problem, because the universe seems to be fine-tuning for the evolution of consciousness. And of course, it's consciousness which also plays a key role when you try and have a model which is going to accommodate mental and spiritual experience. So anyway, I hope that sort of answer at least is fine to be going on with.
Yes, it definitely does. And it's great that you feel comfortable giving an honest answer in this space rather than to a physics audience. So thank you for that. I actually wanted to build on what you've just said with Mindahi here, because yesterday we were thinking about a science that would incorporate the mind and the spirit. But of course, in some native cultures, the indigenous science there does already incorporate, in a sense, mind and spirit together with science. I just wanted to ask Mindahi what your thoughts were on this, and if this worldview is compatible with Western science.
Yes, thank you. Well, for the beginning, we have this opportunity to be here in this time and space as human species. also connected with other, what we call relatives, with other mammals, other animals, with with the minerals, and with the plant kingdom. And I can tell you that culture is not nurtured around the place where you are born. It means that this interrelationship is not just material, but it is also energetical and also produced by the mind. So this is what we call biocultural heritage, biocultural diversity, because it relates to the seen and unseen, because you receive and you give in a reciprocity way of doing and being and acting and feeling. So we also receive from the cosmos these feelings, let's say, because this planet is also God family. What we call the sun is Father Sun, the moon is Grandma Moon. So there's a bigger family. And this is beautiful because when we think about those celestial bodies, we also have some names for them. But some of the names of many places, they are not given by humans. They are given through dream work. And so this is very complex because this is a mountain that gives you the name by the mountain, but the entity. In the Andean way is the apus, the beings of the mountain. In our cosmology is the entities that dwells in the volcanoes and in very energetic places. So what I'm saying is that once you acknowledge and you are acknowledged by the other entities, there is an interrelationship. But I'm very glad that that Bernard is talking about higher dimensions and how he relates to those dimensions, because it's what we are pursuing as human species and other species, because this is evolution, cosmic and spiritual evolution that we are looking for. So those are the very important signals when we are talking about this physical experience, but also mental experience. But the most beautiful is the energetic experience. Those are some might call, religious experience and so on and so forth. But I can tell you, when you are having these experiences, you feel it. That's the reason sometimes when you experience other dimensions, there is something around this special energy that you cannot explain, but you can feel. So this is what we call also the higher consciousness. The higher consciousness is the great spirit that we cannot understand or comprehend completely, but we know that it's there. There's a pulsation, there is a drum. And actually, when we talk about Makik Mu as the great spirit, is that connection with that consciousness, with the higher connection, with the higher dimensions. And it's so beautiful because you can name it as you want. Or sometimes the names arrive to you during the dream time. And yes, so we have this opportunity to experience that, and you can experience even more when you are in this way of doing, thinking, and acting, and being persistent in the way that you are pursuing this connection with mystery, with other dimensions. So we need to go beyond science. We need to go beyond knowledge. we need to go beyond those, what we call even ancestral wisdom or wisdom as a, because this kind of connection is so special that really give us the chance to think about those higher dimensions that they exist. And yeah, thank you for this dialogue, because how we relate to the cosmos is how we relate to ourselves and to the body inside, and how we take care and give care about these relationships. It's about connection. This is about connection, how you connect with the material and the spiritual world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindahi, for that. The next question is for Ruth, and it's sort of following this thread about the nature of science and physics. So this question actually came from Shantina, who unfortunately couldn't attend your live event, but was a recording, and was absolutely fascinated by the notion of mainstream physics being just yang and missing the yin polarity. So could you please expand on the nature of a balanced yin-yang approach to physics? Oh, you're muted.
Okay. All righty, here we go. Okay. Well, you know, the yang idea is this sort of idea that things are unilateral, that they begin perhaps at a source. I mean, just to describe the typical physics approach to something like radiation or a particle generating a field. I mean, it's really thought that a field, influence of a field such as the electromagnetic field, starts from an emitter and just goes out, and as a unilateral entity in itself that is autonomous. So this is the sort of the metaphysical picture, if you will, that is taken for granted among physicists and in the general traditional approach to physics. So it's really just thinking of like as if you're throwing a baseball out. So that's very yang. I'm the initiator. I have the thing I want to transfer to somebody or just discharge, and I just toss it out, and that object that I've tossed out is autonomous. So there's no concept of relation or mutuality. There's no thought to the idea that that it might need to be received, or there might need to be a response to it for anything to happen. So as I mentioned in my talk, that picture of radiation, if you think of a photon as like a baseball, you think of, this is really what the concept that's involved in the traditional description is that, say an atom is like a baseball pitcher, and it goes, okay, I want to discharge a photon, I'm just going to toss it out, and I don't care what happens. Okay, I'm done. I got rid of my photon. But that picture of radiation has all kinds of problems and inconsistencies. It can't explain why the emitter lost energy. It actually, you cannot, it does, it's so they have to kind of put band-aids on it. They have to do things to it at a free field, that just this sort of free field that isn't generated by anything, but just exists. So that's how yang is, the predominance of yang is kind of leading to some problems that in my view just kind of have band-aid solutions. And in fact, I think ultimately leads to the measurement problem in quantum theory, because that concept of unilateral propagation is carried over into quantum theory, in which it's thought that this wave function or quantum state just is autonomous and just goes out and has its deterministic evolution. This is the unitary only picture, the term unitary just basically meaning this deterministic propagation. And strictly speaking, you can never get a measurement result if you have that picture. So I've discussed that in various papers, but So what you're really trying to do in the standard approach is sell your house without a buyer. And that's why you never can get a measurement result, because you're never going to sell your house if you don't have a buyer. The buyer being the yin aspect. And in terms of the transactional picture, that's the absorber. The role of absorbers is just as important. They're sort of like your house buyers, and they have this mutual process with the emitter that sets up the conditions by which you can actually really transfer energy. So that's kind of, I'm not sure, I don't want to go on too long, but that's where we're missing yin in a real physical way. I mean, I don't mean materialist, I don't mean actualist. I simply mean that the physical theory itself is neglecting this mutuality of the relationship between emitters and absorbers, that they have to collaborate on the possiblest level, I would say, that they have to know about each other, and there has to be an interaction that makes it possible for, so to speak, the excited atom to sell its house to the unexcited atom. So that pretty much, I think, gives the overview of what I mean by that.
It's a great picture. Thank you, Ruth, for expanding on that. And finally, the last question is for Jean-Francois. We've spoken about polarity, and in your presentation, you mentioned your secret film, Dune. You mentioned it earlier as well, but of course, during your presentation, the film wasn't out yet. But finally, you've managed to watch the film. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on this film, Dune, and how it relates to your notion of pivotal point.
What I have experienced when I experienced the movie Dune is there's a pivotal point on the life of Paul Atreides. At some point, he received the power to govern a planet. So this is the pivotal point of Paul. And I think this can be related to each of us. We inherited the power to govern our own universe, or our own planet, or our own body, or our own life. So how do you deal with this power? And so I related to that. The movie Dune, for me, it's about how you relate to the power of governing your own universe and to deal with the universe, the universe of the others. Because Paul Atreides had to deal with a kind of planet that is the main richness of the planet is the spice. The spice is an energy that can help you travel through space and time. And so when you irritate your planet, you irritate also to the power of spice. And so Paul had to deal with, do I want only this planet to extract spice? Because the dark side is, I want to go into another universe for extracting the richness and to keep for myself. And I think this question is very important in our time. When you inherit power, or when you encounter a new universe or a person, do you go into a colonization on the other? And so Paul had to deal with to that. And Paul had to create an alliance with the Fremen. And the Fremen is the native of the native people of Arrakis. And I think this also gives us insight about when you inherit the power, do you deal with the first language? The native for me is the first language that came in our heart. And so Paul had to learn this language. And so power is also related to language, to have a good language that create a balance into the power, and not only the language of colonization. I like what Ruth said about the radiation, the male radiation, because what we learn from the Jungian universe is like when you talk on the archetype level, archetype is a field. And this field of the archetype can raise simultaneously on every part. So it's not a yang, it's an integrative field. So it's remind me that if we want to raise power in our universe, we also had to learn the language of the archetype, or the language of the field that we are in it. And I will just finish my answer to the question that I have asked you, and I will ask you to the group. In the next days, we will assist to a guy named Mark Zuckerberg. Will have a lot of power to create his kind of multiverse. Okay, he wants to create a new multiverse with Facebook. So this is an example of a guy like Paul Atreides who receive a lot of power. Zuckerberg receive a lot of power, and if we look that into the Jungian way, look at the emotional archetypal field of Facebook. Return to the beginning of Facebook. This archetypal field was based on a face match. The root of Facebook is you have two girls and you have to find the more hot girls. And so this competition, this energy of competition is hidden in the archetypal field of Facebook. So when you give power to a guy like that, you have this kind of archetypal field to deal with that. So so we have to ask the question, to address the question, to whom we gave the power. Because to who we give the power, we give also the power of be a slave too. So I will finish with that.
Amen.
No, not a woman, not only amen,
I
a
want my
woman too.
cigarette lighter here, yes.
Great. Did anyone want to try and respond to that?
I already did.
Okay, perfect. Great. So we did go a little more over than expected, but I would like us to discuss. And I was wondering if maybe we could pick up from yesterday's discussion during Bernard's second. Oh, Paul's got his hand up already.
Yeah, because in fact, this would be a good opportunity for me to pose my question to Bernard, which has got a bit of a, and I've written it out because I want to be efficient. Because Bernard was particularly concerned to sort of have a bit of input from philosophy of mind. And my background is, to be honest, it's more in philosophy of mind than it is in physics, really, though my thesis sort of was straddled the two. So there's a bit of a, it's not very long, it would take about 3 minutes, I think, but a little bit of an introduction, and then the question comes at the end, okay? So, Ernest Nagel famously characterized consciousness of what it's likeness, what it's like to be a bat, what's it like to be you. The concept of mental content is quite different. It's related to the concept of meaning as applied to language. To take the stock example from so-called analytic philosophy, the statement snow is white, in inverted commas, means that snow is white. But meaning doesn't reside in marks on paper or vocal noises. It's perfectly possible that a person from a faraway planet could say something which sounds exactly like snow is white, but means something completely different. So where does meaning reside? A possible answer is in cerebral processes, which have some duration, bearing in mind what Bernard was saying about the specious present. But Putnam's twin earth argument goes against that idea by considering cases where the brain states of subjects are isomorphic, but the environments are different. The argument led Putnam to famously write, "Meanings aren't in the head." That's semantic externalism, or mental content externalism. The unitary interpretation of mind, which I was talking about, undermines that argument. So what I call dendritic quantum mechanics goes along with the idea that mental content is instanced by brains. Alice splits into Alice up and Alice down. All three are distinct individuals according to temporal counterpart theory. And they're distinct because they have different perceptions, because different processes going on in their brains. When we had the single Alice with many bodies, that was because all the bodies were exactly alike. it's different processes going on in the set theoretical elements of Alice's body, which causes Alice to split in the thought experiment with parallel stochastic universes. What's nowadays called cognitive neuroscience is all about trying to understand how brains work in terms of their mental content. But there's a very, very long way to go. Understanding how the brain of a housefly works is far from trivial. But the mental content exists in brains does not imply that for there to be something it's like to be, that object has to be a brain. And this seems to connect with at least part of Bernard's perspective. What makes us individuals is our mental contents, our perceptions, beliefs, desires, and memories. That's what makes you you. But that is distinct from the fact that you're conscious. You remain you under general anesthetic because your mental contents are preserved, unless you suffer brain damage. So I think that the view I've presented is compatible with Bernard's view, so long as we recognize the difference between consciousness and mental content. It's the domain of consciousness where the mystery lies. It's what David Chalmers called the hard problem of philosophy of mind. So my question to you, Bernard, is, would you agree that our views are compatible, although there might be very much more to your view than to mine? They can coexist. Do you agree?
Okay. First of all, I mean, you had two themes in your remarks. One was to do with meaning, and one was to do with, you know, the relationship between consciousness and the contents of consciousness. And so I'm not very good at connecting those two. I think that meaning is really crucial. And I think that meaning relates to information. And as I'm sure you know, in many approaches to physics, information content is playing a central role. So, you know, we're used to energy being crucial, but information plays an important role in many views of physics. And indeed, that also relates to quantum theory. So when I talk about my higher dimensional space, for example, I sometimes think of that. This was a higher dimensional space, which I've called a sort of higher dimensional reality structure, but I also think of it as an information space. And so in some sense, I think that's where meaning comes in. But I must confess, I don't have a very precise answer to your remark about meaning. Now, but then when it comes on to the question of whether our models are compatible, I'm sure I think they are compatible, but I'm anxious. I don't fully understand the connection between them. And yet I'm intrigued by the closeness of the sort of questions you ask. Now, for example, you started off in your first lecture. You addressed the issue of, if there's a Paul Tappenden 10 to the 100 light years away, in an infinite universe, there should be a Paul Tappenden 10 to the 100 light years away. And your question is, which of the Paul Tappendens are you? In other words, a Paul Tappenden whose brain is identical. And you were saying that if you had the identical brains, in some sense, it would be you. And I asked another question. I said, well, I want to know why you and me, at a mere separation of, I guess, 1,000 kilometers, why are you and why am me? And from my perspective, saying that our two brains are identical, even if our brains were absolutely identical, that would not explain why there would still be the problem of why am I me and not you? Now, you might say that there will be no meaningful distinction, but I would say there is a distinction. I mean, and I would say the fact that I think your answer is that the fact that our brain states are different, that our histories are different, means that we are different people. I agree with that. I agree we're not the same person, but the question I'm asking is to do with consciousness rather than the contents of consciousness. My question is, why is your particular consciousness associated with your brain and my consciousness is associated with my brain? And I'll just finish my train of thought before you answer, Paul. And to me, that is the fundamental question. And in a certain sense, I see a great similarity between what you're saying, what I'm saying, because when you talk about Alice, in all her many worlds. You know, you have your wonderful pictures where you've got a myriad of Alices. I mean, I can imagine a model. Why can't I imagine a multiverse where in one multiverse I'm Paul Tappenden, and in another multiverse I'm Bernard Carr, and in another multiverse I'm James Pete Barbieri. Is this a version of the multiverse that would in some sense reconcile us, where I simply say there are different multiverses where we're actually, our different identities relate to different members of the universe? So I'm now reversing the question to you.
Right, okay. So, well, good. So I think we're clarifying, because what I'm trying to say is keep these two concepts, consciousness and content, completely distinct. Why you're you and why I'm me is to do with content. We've got different thoughts and beliefs, and that's to do because we've got different stuff going on in our brains according to internalism. But then what basis do you have for saying that my consciousness is different from your consciousness? I mean, in what sense is there a consciousness sort of attached to you which is different from the consciousness attached to me? The thing about content is that you have specific content, you know, the belief that bread is made with wheat or whatever. Zillions and zillions of specific contents. And I would suggest that, you know, what makes you is because you've got loads of, I mean, the vast majority of these contents are unconscious at any given moment. You've got all sorts of things going on which you're not conscious of, which are to do with mental content. But again, so you've got a criterion for distinguishing content. So you've got a criterion for saying you're you and mine, for individualizing. But if you go over to consciousness, it's sort of amorphous, but not in a negative sense. I mean, it's something completely different, and it's something which I can't see you can sort of get a hook onto it so that you've got a different consciousness than I have.
Well, I accept, of course. I mean, consciousness is a very difficult word, and I prefer to think about first personhood or selfness, because what I'm saying is that the mystery is, why is your first personhood different from my first personhood? And you see, I could give an answer to that question if I started talking in mystical language. For example, what is often, remember I talked about the idea that the brain is a filter rather than a generator of consciousness. Now, within that perspective, which of course is not the mainstream perspective, I could certainly say, well, the reason is simple. That Paul has got some sort of, whatever you want to call it, some soul or some spirit body, and that gets connected with the brain during his life. And that the identity is associated with Paul's spirit body, and my identity is associated with my spirit body, and we're just temporarily housed in our physical body. So that will be one answer, but of course that is an answer not many physicists are going to like, because most physicists aren't going to believe in a spirit body. But the point I'm going to make is that even that explanation doesn't solve the problem of identity. Because you still got to say, well, why was my self associated with a particular spirit body? Okay, so what I'm saying is I'm putting forth one explanation, really saying why it isn't an explanation. It's a deeper problem than that. And and I don't have the answer to this question. I mean, I'm just saying, I said it's to me the most profound mystery. But what I do think is that I do think ultimately the link between you and the difference between you and me is an illusion. I do believe that at a certain level, we're all one person, because I do believe there is only one consciousness. Now, I realize that's different from the term unitary consciousness, which you use, and I'm using a very mystical concept.
Well, just to cut in, I mean, I didn't mention consciousness, and this whole thing, this unitary interpretation of mind thing, is all to do with content. The idea is, right?
I understand.
Yeah. So the idea is that all those little Alices, they constitute a single Alice because they're all physically isomorphic and they instance the very same content. So,
I mean, my explanation. Sorry, Paul.
Well, I mean, I would only add that you see when you sort of tentatively go to explaining in terms of a soul or something like that, seems to me that what I'm saying to do is if you're using an analogy with physical objects, really. I mean, you're trying to find a sense to individuate consciousness, and that's where I just don't. I'm not sure you can go there, because you can individuate the content. You can have. The thing is, I can go along with the idea that we have different people because we have different concepts, different beliefs, and all the rest of it. But we share consciousness. But the thing is, now how you put that? Do we share the same consciousness? Well, why not? Because it's the content which makes us different. The consciousness is something which is there sort of additionally, if you like. I can't put it better than that.
Just
all I would say, Paul, is that in my perspective, and I don't have the answer to the question, but in my perspective, the answer to the question must involve the nature of time, because you and me are clearly different in terms of normal time. But what I was arguing that there's different levels of time, and that the only way to resolve this fragmentation, if you like, of this one consciousness into individual consciousness is with reference to some higher dimensional model of time in which there are different levels of time. And so that's going beyond the normal quantum, even beyond the many worlds picture which you're talking about. So I would only say that I don't know the answer, but whatever the answer is, I would say it has to go beyond the sort of normal level of discussion of quantum theory or relativity theory.
I'd just like to come in on this. So we've heard the physics perspective on this problem, which is it's a big problem. But I wanted to hear if maybe there's a Jungian or native perspective on this problem, if there is one.
Can you reformulate the problem or the question?
Yes. So basically, the problem is if we do have this one consciousness, how can we have individuation? So if there's one, what's the difference? Why is there a difference between my consciousness and your consciousness?
Yeah, so maybe we have to dig more into the word consciousness, and maybe we can just use the letter C for consciousness, and C is the light. So maybe we can see a consciousness as a point of light or a point of view in the universe. And so I will reformulate the question in that. So from which point of view do you observe the universe? And we can return this to the idea of a light, like the C, the letter C, and to see, I like to play with words. So the letter C and how you see is a point of view in the universe. So maybe, and related to what Carl Sagan said, we are a way to see the universe, or each of us, we are a way to experience universe. So I will reformulate the question on that. So from which point of view you start? And what is the point of view? It's always a point of light, like the letter C for consciousness. So that's my point of view.
Great. Thank you, Jean-Francois. And what about you, Mindahi? Do you have a position on this?
Well, I can just say that everything is interrelated. And we have this interrelationship. We are just a projection of other beings in ourselves. So, for example, what we call the sacred elements of life, the air, the earth, the fire, the wind, we all have in our own bodies, but also in our thinking, in our way of doing, in our way of caring for others. So that's the reason reciprocity is always very powerful. because of course we are units, but units in the diversity. And at the same time, we are there to conform this experience that we are living through, but it's just an experience. This is not this is just a process that we are living through. So I understand that we have this chance to experience this, let's say, individual way of experience matter, but actually we are the reflection of other sacred elements. In other words, it means that yes, we are individuals, but in the collective, we cannot be just individuals, never, ever. So yes, we always understand that this interconnection is so important, so sacred, that is more important than the individual. So that's what the collective consciousness is so important, because then when we think about us and not about I, then we can understand a little bit. But we are not going to understand what is this mystery to be in this world and this time and space, and then comprehend everything. Because ourselves, we have had experiences. We have experienced being in other worlds, in other spaces and time, without being there, but being there at the same time. So what I want to say is that, yes, we have the notion of the unity, but unity in the diversity. So this conscious that we have as individuals is related to the bigger consciousness. Thank you.
Can I just say how much I resonate with that, Mindahi? Because, I mean, the point is, the illusion is, in my mind, the view that the only level of consciousness in the universe is the level of consciousness associated with human beings. You know, the consciousness with a specious present of about a second. And to me, as I said yesterday, that is a very arrogant assumption. To me, it seems there's no reason why there shouldn't be levels of consciousness which operate on much shorter or much longer time scales. And we might not be aware of those levels of consciousness, but I see no reason why they shouldn't all be operating. And once you get to that idea, you have to accept that there can be a hierarchy of eyes, if you like, all the way from the little eye in this brain to the big eye, which is associated with the cosmos. And I think what you're saying, Mindahi, is that we can somehow get to experience those higher levels of I. And when you get to experience those higher levels of I think you find that the apparent distinction between the little eyes, between Paul's eye and my eye, sorry to keep picking on you, Paul, but you inspired the thought. I mean, that in some sense is an illusion. It's only a separation which appears at one level. And that when you're at the higher level of consciousness, the illusion goes away. At least that's just my model. I'm not talking from experience.
Thank you so much for your words, Bernard, because I really resonate with what you're saying as well.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you.
Just on the time scale thing, I mean, does this relate? You know, if you can watch an insect like a rat, which is capable of reacting much more quick. I mean, you can't imagine, how it can manage to interact so quickly with its environment. Well, one can imagine that has a consciousness, perhaps, which is on a different time scale. I mean, is that in the same? Is that related to what you're talking about at all?
Yes, indeed, Paul. I think, in fact, you can do experiments, and the species present for different animal species is clearly different. I mean, the species present for a fly, for example, is much shorter, so that, you know, we think we're going to swat a fly with a newspaper, but a fly just escapes because the newspaper's coming down in very slow motion. On the other hand, I think there's evidence that other species have a species present which is much longer, you know, so that time goes much more slowly, perhaps, if you're a tortoise. I mean, I don't know from experience, obviously, but I think there's evidence for that. So indeed, and in some sense, that variation of the species present can doubtless be explained in terms of, in physical terms, in terms of the brain structure or whatever it is for a fly. But I was referring a little bit going beyond that. I was talking about experiences where the species present changes more dramatically, where, for example, you might have a near-death experience and see your whole life in an instant. And I think also Mindahi was referring to experiences probably where the species present changes more dramatically than might be compatible with a normal neuroscientific perspective, that the species present is just a function of the brain. But again, I'm just speculating. This isn't the mainstream view.
Well, thank you all for contributing to the discussion. It really has been really interesting, but I guess we should really open it up to our audience. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us. As you may have noticed, Ruth had to leave. She had a prior engagement, but so she won't be answering questions from you all. But I've been seeing you been asking her a lot on Sutra, and she's been very responsive. So I did want to thank her for that as well, even though she's not here now. So yeah, so thank you all for contributing and doing this discussion. And I will now bow out to Jenna. I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, all of you, for the rousing discussion. And I'm eager for everyone to raise their hands or write in the chat and participate and join us all in this discussion. I see some hands are up. I'd like to go first if Shantina would like to respond to anything as director of the Perry Center. Shantina, if you'd like to jump in, be happy to give you some space to react.
There would be way too much to react to.
Yeah.
I will just thank everyone for the ideas that they brought in, and I resonate with many of them. As Bernard brought out, this notion of the universe looking at itself through our eyes, but not just through our eyes, through the eyes of many species, many creatures, and possibly even creatures that we have not the faintest idea about. So I'll just stop here and give the space to the audience to ask questions, because it's almost too rich what we have in this feast.
Thank you, Shantina. It's beautiful. I'm going to go in the order I see hands up, and I also I see people physically raising hands too. I see you, so I'll keep you in mind. Alan, would you like to contribute?
Thank you. I have a question that initially follows on from Bernard's presentation yesterday, but I think it involves, well, it's not an easy question to answer, I feel, so I'm sure everybody would have something that they could say. But the sense I have is that the universal multiverse seems to reflect intelligence, not just fine-tuning at the outset, but ongoing intelligent choices being made, for example, in the origin and evolution of life. I think Basil Hiley mentioned in his talk that it couldn't all be down to random mutations. And various scientists have shown, for example, that the creation of a new functional protein is all but impossible without some form of inbuilt direction, at least not possible through random mutations, given the timescale since the Big Bang. So my question is, do any of the hypotheses for the multiverse make intelligent choice more likely? And I mean, I was wondering about consciousness guiding what takes place. through being able to see the future outcomes of alternative collapses of the wave function and selecting what is favorable in terms of some goal. Bernard mentioned yesterday Mahler somehow receiving information when sort of composing a symphony. I suppose another way of I could ask this question is, how else could a fundamental universal consciousness be intelligent rather than just conscious?
Jenna, should I attempt to answer the question first?
Feel free, yeah.
Yeah, Alan, that's a very interesting question because, you know, if one accepts, I was arguing that in some sense mind and consciousness were fundamental and not incidental features of the universe, in some sense that mind even preceded the physical universe. But then what you're raising the question, well, if it's mind, is not intelligence also a fundamental feature of the universe? And when you look at the universe, when you look at the cosmic Ouroboros and the way everything, you know, fits together so beautifully, it sort of smells of some stupendous intelligence. You know, there's no doubt about it. The universe looks intelligent. But you have to be rather careful here, because then you start apparently talking about intelligent design, you know, and of course most physicists are aghast at the idea of intelligent design, the idea that the universe was created by God. Now, and indeed, when I talked about, you know, the fine tuning, I said you have two alternatives. You've got the multiverse, which says it's all random in some sense. There are lots of universes, some of which necessarily allow life to arise. And then you've got the alternative, which says that there's God, basically, whichever word you want to use, which, if you like, is great intelligence, which is actually choosing the conditions such that life arises. Now, I explained that one is torn between these two alternatives, but I also said I'm not going to say for sure which one it makes most sense. But what you're really saying is that if you have a model in which mind is somehow fundamental, and that's not a feature of all the multiverse scenarios, it is a feature of the multiverse scenario I favor, then you're bound to ask, well, if intelligence is part of this model of mind, are you not veering dangerously close to the intelligent design which you were trying to get away with when you first postulated the multiverse? Because that's why the multiverse appealed to people. It meant you didn't have to use intelligent design. I mean, that's why atheists like Weinberg and Hawking, like the multiverse. You don't have to invoke intelligent design. And yet, in the model I've been talking about, if mind is fundamental, intelligence is fundamental. And so, and are you not close to intelligent design? I mean, so I'd not thought of it in that way before, Alan. So I'm very interested in your question. And in some sense, I do think of consciousness as evolving, and intelligence in some sense as evolving. But it brings in the whole question of purpose. You know, is there a purpose for the universe? It's all very well saying that mind preceded the universe because this higher dimensional space came before the lower dimensional projection. But once you start talking about purpose and intelligence, you know, you're adding another dimension to the whole discussion, and it's a very interesting dimension. And it's, you know, if you're going to identify this universal consciousness with a big C, with God, you're then bound to say, well, is God intelligent? Well, presumably you want God to be, whatever your concept of God is. I don't tend to use the word much myself. Presumably God is better be quite intelligent. I mean, I assume he's much more intelligent than me, and much more intelligent than you know, Stephen Hawking. They used to say Bertrand Russell didn't believe in God because he didn't want to think there was anybody in the universe more intelligent than he was. And so, but I don't know, it's an interesting question. I do think intelligence must be part of this, you know, part of this fundamental mind as well. So, but I never thought of the question in the terms you've answered before. So thank you very much for that. I should let the other speakers come in.
Does any other panelists move to join this part of the
Just-
discussion?
Just a simple idea. Maybe we can see intelligence as a process to solve problem. So intelligence solve problem, even natural intelligence or artificial intelligence. Intelligence solve problem. Consciousness explore possibilities. That will be my little contribution.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say something very quickly as well, which is that, you know, if we didn't have Bernard's sort of multiverse with all the different constants, we're not obliged to think in terms of intelligent design. I mean, we should just admit our ignorance. I mean, it's an important part of science to just be able to say, well, I've got no idea, you know, I just haven't, I don't know, maybe in 100 years, 1,000 years, I'll get closer to understanding. I mean, I think it's really salutary that, you know, there was a big discussion, there was conflict in the 19th century between geologists and physicists, because the geologists were sort of saying, well, look, you know, these mountains, they've got to be at least hundreds of millions of years old. And the physicists say, well, yeah, there's no way the sun could have been kept shining hundreds of millions of years. What mechanism could it possibly have? They had not a snowball in hell's chance of understanding how the sun shines. They just didn't, there were no, just wouldn't have been possible. So, you know, I think there are times when you just have to say, well, I mean, it's the cosmological multiverse is certainly interesting. It's fascinating to think that we get more and more sophisticated ways of studying the background radiation, which might give indications for it and so on. But the idea that somehow it's either that or it's got to be God, you know, no, it could be just, well, we don't know, and we don't just try and search for an explanation to sort of put a band-aid on it. You know, I mean, admission of ignorance is a fundamental part of science.
Paul, I completely agree. And we don't know the answer to this question, just as we don't know the answer to the previous question we were talking about. And actually, I would say the most interesting questions are precisely the ones you don't know the answer to. But you're right. One has to be humble and admit one doesn't know the answer. But Alan, the other question, you know, the other issue your question raises is, if we do take this view that consciousness in the universe is somehow evolving, you can then ask the question, is the universe becoming more intelligent? And I must confess, I rather like the idea the universe is becoming more intelligent. But again, I have no idea whether that's true or not. Here on planet Earth, I like to think we're becoming more intelligent, but as we walk our way to, you know, doomsday, one has to question whether we really are becoming more intelligent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that in. Kyla, would you like to add something?
Hello, everybody. Thank you. First of all, I just want to say how much I appreciate this space and the ability to have these interdisciplinary conversations and talking about science as well as spirituality and embracing the mystery and what we can know and all of it together. It's so refreshing and it's so unusual and it's so powerful, and I just support it completely. And I have a history in philosophy. I got my undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I've also spent 10 years studying spirituality. And I want to bring in a more Eastern perspective that talks about the universe dividing itself, or the wholeness, the oneness dividing itself into the two, and then the two into the four, and so on and so forth. And then complexity, and just pure complexity has generated all of what we see and hear and experience. And so regarding the question of why are we different individuals, I'm wondering if it can just be a result of this complexity, and why it goes all the way back to the first question of why did the wholeness split into two to begin with? Why is there anything at all experiencing and interacting with anything? And I like to think, well, the oneness just kind of got bored. I mean, you imagine it's kind of boring just being oneness for eternity. So I don't know if that is any way can speak to that conversation about why we are individuals, but so many people have said so many interesting things that my brain has gone so many different directions. I don't know if I'm focused at all, but I really want to just say thank you for being here. So thank you for listening.
So Carla, maybe I can just make a comment. I mean, I'm glad you obviously share this interest in why the oneness has now a multiplicity. I remember when I moved to London, which was about 30 years ago, I was completely overwhelmed because I came from Cambridge, which is much more sleepy, and in London there were so many things to do. There were so many people because London's a big city. There were so many people to see. There were so many movies to watch. There were so many restaurants to go to, and I was a bit overwhelmed by it all. And then I was walking home one evening and I suddenly thought to myself, oh, right. I said, now I understand why God created all these different people, because the only way I can actually experience all of London would, and go to all the shows and all the restaurants and all the parties would be to split myself into lots of Bernard Carrs. And of course, it's a rather silly thought, but then I just suddenly thought, well, that must be why God, or what term you want to use, divided himself into billions of different beings, because that's the only way he could experience everything at the same time in some sense. Now, I don't, I mean, that might be just fanciful, but it's all part of the trying to understand why there's a question of why we're the one divided into a multiplicity. It all comes down to, from this perspective, to the universe wanting to understand itself. And the only way it can understand itself or even love itself is to be divided into the multiplicity. So that doesn't explain from a physics perspective where the multiplicity comes from, which is what I was discussing with Paul. But it may be in some sense along the lines you suggested. It explains why there needs to be a multiplicity.
Well, and I also think that there's something to do with the time and the idea that time is only a matter of where we place our awareness. Like there's no past, present, future all exist at the same time. It's just where is the light of awareness within all of that spectrum. And perhaps that informs the question as well. Like, you've probably heard the analogy like we're all just drops of water in the ocean. How would you distinguish one drop from another when it's all in the ocean? But when we're individual drops, it's clear, but it's still all water. But it's where is the awareness? And if the awareness can be in all those different drops at the same time, and then you get into the Eastern perspectives of that individual drop being able to connect to the ocean and experiencing an expanded awareness and seeing the bigger picture and all of it at the same time and losing the individuated self. So I just see how the science and the spirituality come together. I've been attending the consciousness conference in Tucson since the beginning that Chalmers started. And I've just been waiting for these two worlds to come together, and it's finally happening. It's just so exciting. So anyway, thank you all.
Thank you. It's beautiful. I don't want to interrupt anyone who wants to jump in, but also we have John Briggs with his hand up.
Sorry.
I heard you say sorry.
Okay, good. Thank you all for the wonderful discussion. Listening, it occurs to me that something might be gained by replaying a few things that Mindahi said and sort of slowing down a little bit and actually not responding to them. So I'm going to just highlight a couple of things that I heard Mindahi say that I think, I don't know, maybe makes a coda or somehow rings through this discussion in an interesting way. first thing I noted was he said, we live in mystery. We live in mystery. And as I understand Mindahi, mystery is different from the unknown. I mean, we do live in the unknown as well, but we're not just talking about something that can be known when we're talking about mystery. The second thing that he said was thinking from the I to the we. Thinking from the I to the we. And in one of his later answers, he said, we are a projection of other beings. We are a projection of other beings. And we cannot be just individuals. We cannot just be individuals. So I just put that back into the conversation, see where it goes in people's heads. Finally, it occurred to me, what would happen if we stopped asking questions? Questions presume answers. That we think that there are answers. And of course, I put that as a question. So I'll leave it at that.
I wasn't sure if John was encouraging us not to answer the question.
I was, yes.
I just think the process of trying to answer the question is more important than the answer. And as Paul said earlier, we don't know the answer to many of these questions and may never know the answer, but it's the attempt to answer the question which is most elucidating.
I agree, but this is a kind of a trickster movement here. We presume we come from a society, a world in which asking questions is what we do. It's how we learn. It's the scaffolding of our knowledge. But we don't look at the inbuilt presupposition that when you ask a question, you work very hard and go through a process and think that there is an answer to the question. That's a different state of mind from living in mystery.
Oh, yes, and obviously, sorry, someone else was going to say something.
Well, I was just very quickly, I was going to just say that Richard Feynman, famous physicist who I quoted in my talk, had this nice saying, I think, well, they probably got it from somewhere else, I don't know, that I'd rather have questions that I can't answer than answers that I can't question. Which is quite a good one, I thought.
Well, what if you have neither?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know.
I mean, think of all the answers that are lying around in your head.
But I think what you're also, sorry,
well,
Paul.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, in some sense, presumably, I need quite a lot of those answers in order to sort of guide myself around the world and interact with it effectively and so on. And of course, you know, we interact with it in more and more complex ways, which people might or might not like building nuclear reactors, which is only done because we've got lots of answers to lots of questions. So.
Yeah, that answer was building of nuclear reactors wasn't a great answer.
But I suppose, John, in a way, you're asking the question of, there's the sort of the left hemisphere versus the right hemispheric approach to trying to understand the world, and obviously when we're having a meeting like this, it's very cognitive, it's very left hemisphere. We're having our discussions, But then the question is, what about that intuitive truth, which in some sense is beyond words and which doesn't come through discussion? And I think maybe you're suggesting in the silence, when you're not trying to answer, that's where you also get important, elucidation. And that's why I found, Mindahi's comments so valuable, because he's talking about experience. He's not just cogitizing and putting forth models. He's talking about his experience as opposed to sort of experiment, and that's also the relationship between science and spirituality. It's a distinction between experimenting or theorizing and actually having an experience. And so, for example, when we talk about things like higher dimensions, it's all very well for me to talk about them from a mathematical point of view, but that's very different from experiencing them. And Mindahi is talking about experiencing higher dimensions. And, people often say, well, what possible evidence is there for higher dimensions? People are looking for them in the particle accelerators and they haven't found them. It's all mathematical fantasy.
But Bernard, if I could interject there, you're using the expression higher dimensions. You see the built-in assumption in the notion of higher, and the way in which that perhaps precludes your experiencing whatever it is. I mean, Mindahi's I know that Mindahi often stresses living in mystery, and it's a very important way of thinking about the subject under discussion here. It's extremely difficult, I know for myself, to live in mystery. The closest I come is poetry, I suppose. But because our brains are very busy, they're very active, they generate thoughts, they generate questions, they generate answers, they fill the world with questions and answers. But if we don't have that quiet that drops out those questions and answers, we're going to continue to make a mess.
Yeah, but the point I was making, that regardless of what term you use, like higher dimensions, the point I was making is that actually the evidence comes from the experience that Mindahi has, not from the experiment, because we don't have experimental. We may get experimental evidence at some stage, but at the moment we only have the experience, and the experience, you could argue, comes from the silence. When people have their mystical states where they actually access what I'm calling higher dimensions, but whatever term you want to use, I think that does come from the silence. When you're deliberately getting beyond the sort of left hemisphere function, you're getting beyond cogitation and words. So I'm sort of accepting what you say. I mean, maybe others would comment on that.
I would like Mindahi to have an opportunity to speak if desired.
Yes, thank you. Very shortly. When we say we live in mystery, it's also that there is an opportunity to experience this mystery. We have, like the other time I was mentioning how there are specific hours, time and space during the day and when the night comes. So when there's this time and space connection ourselves with at dusk, let's say, or the dawn, something happens there that is in between the day and the night, in between the night and the day. And during the day also there is these opportunities. So I can tell you that when I was experiencing myself with my grandpa in the daily life, he would stop whatever he was doing at noon, at 3, at 7. And sometimes he would wake up at midnight, 3 a.m. because there is always 3 a.m. when the everywhere around when the Earth is traveling. So that is a continuum of mystery. But you have the chance to experience it. You have the chance to know about, to somehow to live in and experience this time and space in a more deep way. So maybe when we talk about higher or lower or these dimensions, it's just for us to understand a little bit that, of course, there's a process, and a process is to evolve, unfold who we are in connection with the universe. So that's why sometimes we need to be quiet, to stop thinking, stop doing, and just to get connected. But there should be an intention. And somebody said, not as intention, but as a purpose. The purpose. But I think I really love the word intention, because when you focus that, when you become aware, and that's the connection with mystery. When you are really put all your being and also your doing, your feeling in that connection. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. That was really beautiful.
Jenna, could I just add one
Please.
quick thing? Krishnamurti used to say, the experience is not different from the experiencer. And if you add that element to it, I think it resonates interestingly with multiple dimensions.
I understand. Oh, I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry. I just want to invite Shantina to join this discussion because I understand you wanted to add to this moment. And Bernard, don't let me stop you from responding.
No, I was only going to say that Jean-Francois has made an interesting comment in the chat, which he isn't saying in person, but I found that his interest. Should I quote you, Jean-Francois?
Actually, before we move to a sidebar, I think Shantina asked to come in.
Yeah.
And thank you. I see you also, JF, and I see Igor and Niels. I see you all.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add a small remark. We live in mystery. That's basic. That's fundamental. What are we doing as scientists with that? What's the role of science in that? To me, science is deepening our appreciation of mystery. Einstein was always very explicit about this. It's like working on the edge of mystery, undoing what we ordinarily presuppose. We think we know what the world is. I think science, properly practiced, is undoing that. It's teaching us, no, we don't know. And that's the charming aspect. Terrifying also.
I certainly agree that one's experience of science brings with it a sense of deepening sense of mystery. I agree. I mean, the more we seem to have some insight into how the world works, the more astonishing it appears. Absolutely.
Mm, mm. So Bernard, picking up on what you were bringing in.
Well, actually, I was only picking up on what Jean-Francois said because I
That's what I
thought it
was going to say. I was going to
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
Jeff, would you like Bernard to read your question or would you like to unmute? Ah, Bernard, would you tell us what JF
Well,
would like to say?
Jean-Francois has merely said maybe the other dimensions are not higher or lower, but inner. In the movie Contact by Carl Sagan, Ellie discovers the code to build a space-time machine and the gate between the 3 and the 4 of the prime numbers of pi, between the rational and irrational numbers. And I like that remark because, you know, one shouldn't get too hung up by terms like higher or lower. I mean, I was using the phrase in a precise mathematical sense, but you know, the word higher, it sounds rather pretentious and could be confusing. And I think the key point about these other dimensions is that they are inner dimensions in the sense that they're experiential dimensions. But they can also, even particle physicists might call them inner dimensions in the sense, you know, they distinguish between the large dimensions, which are extended, and the inner dimensions, which are very small, so you never see them. So, but what's interesting about the word inner is referring to experience as well as experiment. And that's why it's so fascinating. And the irony is, you know, in the Large Hadron Collider, they're trying to find these extra dimensions in the Large Hadron Collider, and they haven't discovered them. But on the face of it, if the Large Hadron Collider, because it might discover them, it just hasn't got to the right energies. If the Large Hadron Collider were to discover these extra dimensions, these whatever you want to call them, inner dimensions, what an amazing thought that these extra dimensions are something to do with mentality. And on the face of it, that's a crazy idea. You know, if I said to my friends at Geneva, at Large Hadron Collider, if you discover these extra dimensions, you're discovering mind, they would say I was crazy, you know. But actually, we get this concept in movies all the time. And I know Jean-Francois can talk about this. You know, for example, in the movie Interstellar, you know, it's all they go through a fifth dimension, and this fifth dimension is associated with mind. And so in many cases, it seems to me, the movies actually anticipate what physics is going to discover. And so that's why I found your comment so interesting, referring to the movie. And there's even a historical example of this. You know, you often mention Sagan, Jean-Francois. Well, I'm sure you know this, but the movie Contact was prompted because Carl Sagan wanted to know whether you could get to a distant galaxy by using a wormhole or using a black hole. And he asked Kip Thorne, who of course is a famous physicist, and Kip said, no, you can't use a black hole. But then he thought, but maybe you can use a wormhole as a time machine. And this prompted all the work which Kip Thorne and then other people did on wormholes as time machines in relativity. And that's an example of where a movie, Contact, prompted a development in physics, which is something which people don't always appreciate. So all these thoughts flowed from your comment, Jean-Francois, but somehow I'm voicing your thoughts. But anyway, they're very interesting.
I don't want, JF, are you feeling the need to respond verbally? You don't have to at all. I just noticed.
I just want to say thank you for this moment. Just thank you for the whole event, the space you have created, Paris Center, James, Shantina, Gina. I just want to say big thanks for that.
Thank you to you, all of you panelists. So we have, it looks like there's 4 minutes left in this session. There are 2 hands up, and theoretically I should be saying thanks to everyone and what have you right now. Should we see if we can get to these questions so people feel open to that? See if we can. Igor, you are next. Let's do it.
Hi. Now just contextualize my wife and I joined here just for a devotion to understand and seek the truth in everything. And I think maybe we are talking about the ultimate truth in the universe and in the universe. And I just want to call out Shantina as well. I just read your book, Shantina, Pilgrimage to Emptiness. And before that, I read it several times, the Tao Te Ching and the Bhagavad Gita, and the connection. And my question, maybe to what Bernard said, there are three things that I just want to bring in. I don't know if it's a question or more of a comment that I would like to hear from you, maybe both. One is this idea of the Wu Wei, of the action by not action, and the just the emergence of something by not doing something. The second, and I think maybe is related to quantum, is this idea of a pattern that we're talking about consciousness, but then we experience in every day the notion of a pattern. And if energy is pattern, if we get to the point that we realize that a photon or to the microscope, we just see a pattern, that solves a lot of issues around consciousness, because we see pattern everywhere. And the third, I think, is also in the Tao Te Ching, is the notion that Lao Tse says that a person can understand the whole by not leaving the home. So we can actually, even if we don't have evidence, we can learn and know everything from home. So just these comments and then a specific comment about your book, Shantina, I really appreciate, because it gave me a lot of insights into the Tao Te Ching as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
very happy about that.
I mean, I think the emphasis on non-action is so important, and the same, the emphasis on silence, because ultimately, I think that is where the inspiration comes from. Even in science, that's an experience. Scientists will often have their idea which comes out of the silence. It doesn't come out of their cognitive process, and then they spend 10 or 20 years trying to work it out, with the rational side. But ultimately, often the inspiration actually comes from the silence, and it's like a gift, and then you start thinking about it, but in some sense, the process of thinking is an inhibition. It stops the thinking, stops elucidation at some point. I mean, obviously, everything in life is a compromise. You need both approaches, and that's what I suppose the alliance of science and spirituality is trying to use both those processes, because science is based on a cognitive process. But you need more than that to really understand the universe. And I think that's what you're saying.
Thank you for that. So we're at the top of the hour. I'm aware we've got one hand up, and we have beautiful panelists who may have closing remarks. Shantina may have closing remarks for this series. Do we feel like we should go just an extra 5 minutes and let everyone briefly have their time to speak? Does that feel comfortable?
Fine
Niels,
with me.
oh, great. Niels, do you feel like you can ask your question in this small time frame?
Yes, I could. I would love a discussion with Bernard, really, about intuition and the right hemisphere. It's something we haven't got control over. It's we call it unconscious, and it is actually the thing that makes us be able to do things in parallel, and it is also actually a mind in itself, and it is also a point where we join with God. if you want to understand this better, then I can point you to A Course in Miracles, ACIM. That is brilliant on that. It's all about mind, the body and mind thing. But the author is Jesus, the man who rose again. So your defense is probably up now. But what I want to say, so I wanted to ask the question if any of you know about A Course in Miracles.
Thank you, Niels.
Because that actually answers it. And I will just
Sorry.
say that. Can I just say one more thing?
Is it
that I have an algorithm that does the right hemisphere. So if I would love to talk to Bernard at some point, informally.
Okay,
well,
let's...
you have my email address, I'm sure, Niels, or you can get my email address, and I should say I prefer to talk by Zoom, actually, like this, because I'm very bad at email.
We can do that, yes.
Let's do that. Let's do that after the call. We'll make sure you all are connected and see.
Okay, I can't do. I've got something else right now.
No, I'm so sorry, Niels, but
some other day we could perhaps arrange that.
That's going to be good. Thank you. Sorry to be so brief in this moment, but we're already over time, and I don't want the panelists to leave without feeling like they've been able to give their wrap up as well. Is there, Mindahi, is there anything you would like to add as a way of conclusion of your beautiful sentiments you've brought to us?
Yes, the kamadi kwada nihwa rasukoi ki rasukoi hu. What I'm saying is that I'm very grateful to be here with you, and I touch your heart with my heart, and that's very significant for us to really appreciate this moment. So thank you to the Paris Center for making this possible, and all of you.
Thank you. So beautiful.
I might just very quickly say that, look, in as much as quantum mechanics has been involved in what we've been talking about, I think everybody should really take on board that absolutely nothing is settled. I mean, as I just said a little earlier, if anything, ideas become more and more diverse. So I really don't think we should be going away thinking one or other of these interpretations is somehow the right one. It's all in, well, will one emerge? I don't know, but at the moment it's mostly, I would say, various camps arguing their case and hopefully building bridges between the other camps, but we'll see.
Bernard, you look like you've got a...
Well, I would just like to echo that the whole topic of the multiverse is marred in controversy. I mean, everybody has different views, and as to whether it's even respectable. That none of that matters. I mean, all of this is speculation. It could all be wrong. It doesn't matter. The process of discussing it is what is so stimulating, and what I've enjoyed about this meeting is listening to all the other presenters, because although I've written a book about the multiverse, but I've realized that there's a lot about the multiverse I'd never thought about. And especially, I mean, of course, I was aware of the physics aspects of it. So, I vaguely know about what Paul and Ruth are talking about. But what I especially appreciated is the sort of different aspects of the multiverse, which, for example, which came through Jean-Francois' talk and from Mindahi's talk, which were not sort of aspects of the multiverse I normally thought about. So I found it was so valuable to get those links between these different areas, because those links are there, and it's all part of this big overview which one needs to sort of draw together science and spirituality in some sense. So I'm very grateful to all the other presenters. Of course, I'm also grateful for the audience. I know there's this wonderful sutra thing, but I must confess that the emails have been coming so fast. I've not been able to keep up with them all, but I'm looking forward to reading all the remarks and the correspondence between the audience as well. But of course, I'm mostly, of course, grateful to, well, let me just say the Parry Centre for organising this get together, because it's been it's my first visit, visit in inverted commas to Parry, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm very grateful to have been invited. Thank you.
So grateful to have you, all of you. This has been so stimulating to me personally, and hear such positive feedback from the community as well, who has also been incredibly stimulating. Now, JF, you said thank you to the Parry Center. Should I move to Shantina, or would you like some concluding? Okay. Shantina, would you like to say anything as our goodbye and wrap up?
Sure,
And thank you.
sure.
Thank you.
A big thank you. It's been a very enjoyable experience for me. This started a long time ago. I think James was in our minds, and then you've carried it through, and Jenna has carried it through, and the Parry Center has carried it through, and I'm very grateful for that. It's been a rich experience. I wish it will become sometime soon a personal contact, because if there's something which is very specific of the Parry Center, is the convivial experience of being together and playing with questions together, especially playing with questions that cannot be answered. So I very much hope that sometime soon we'll meet in Parry. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel the same way, and I'm sad that this is the last of the Multiple Universes sessions. It's been so beautiful and enriching for me to spend this time with you all. And thank you, James, for your wonderful hosting job. And hopefully we'll see you all soon. We'll look for you on Sutra and over email. And anyone who wasn't able to speak their truth or finish their sentences, I'm sorry. And we want to share this space with you. Thank you all.
Hey, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. I also wanted to say that this is our last big event of the year. So I just wanted to thank you all the audience as well, for keep coming to all of our events. It's really been a fantastic year where we've done so many events this year, and it's been really fantastic, and we couldn't have done it without you. So thank you all for coming and coming back as well.
Yeah.
And thank you, James and Jenna, for your chairing these sessions so well.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you. Next time in Parry.
Yes.
While we're doing thank yous, let's thank Eleanor for keeping us all in the loop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.